Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. The calls to justice from the National Inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls was the main subject in Fredericton, New Brunswick today. That's where the Assembly of First Nations is holding its annual General Assembly. Today's session included a resolution that is to be sent to the federal government. APTN's Amber Bernard is covering this week's event, and she joins me now. Amber, good to see you.
Hey.
Can you tell us about what the resolution included?
Yeah, so the MMIWG resolution that was presented and approved by the AFN today is urging the government to implement the calls to justice from the final report into the inquiry of murdered and missing Indigenous women. And they are also asking the government to create a comprehensive national level action plan to prevent the murdering and missing of Indigenous women. Now, just a quick recap. Last month, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Inquiry final report was released. That included 231 calls to action. It also included the word genocide that the government has yet to acknowledge, if they'll acknowledge that it is a genocide that's still happening. It's also really important to note that the AFN, unlike the final inquiry report it had no deadline for the government to respond with an action plan, but the AFN resolution today is asking the government to respond with a plan by September 6th. So that's less than 7 weeks from today. And one of the key creators behind that resolution is BC Chief Judy Wilson, and we have a clip of what she has to say.
I believe the issue is implementing it. It can't be just in a singular layer. It has to be in multiple layers, multiple cross-ministry approaches, multiple government approaches, cross-community, however you want to refer to it. But it has to be at every level, and it has to be more education in the schools, because right now I feel there isn't enough.
Amber, interesting, there was a date attached to the resolution. What type of reaction did the Chiefs have?
You know what? That was the most surprising part of the day. There was a lot of reluctancy from chiefs to speak with us about the resolution that the AFN had approved and brought forth to the government today. I wasn't able to get any of the chiefs on camera, but I did speak to one chief off camera. She doesn't want to be named, but she's suspecting that because the AFN Women's Council is so new, so they just appointed Chief Beagle to chair that committee, which is the AFN Women's Council, and she also declined to speak with us. Anyway, this unnamed chief is saying because she's so new, didn't have time to go through the 231 calls to justice, she's reluctant to speak with us, and so are the other chiefs because they haven't been able to go through the full report. That's what we're hearing. So I mean, that's the most surprising part of the day, is that a lot of chiefs didn't want to speak to that.
Interesting stuff, Amber. We'll have to leave it there. Thanks for bringing us up to speed.
Thank you.
A trial date has been set for Brayden Bushby. Bushby is facing a second-degree murder charge in the death of Barbara Kentner. The jury trial is scheduled to begin in Thunder Bay on January 13th of 2020 and last for 3 weeks. Bushby was first charged with aggravated assault after he allegedly threw a trailer hitch out of the window of a moving vehicle, striking Kentner as she walked down the street 2 years ago. She died 6 months later, and Bushby was charged with second-degree murder. Cameo Capo was looking to buy a chainsaw when he walked into a Regina Canadian Tire 2 years ago. What followed was an altercation with a store manager that played out live on Facebook. Capo filed a human rights complaint against the store. Now, the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission has announced a settlement was reached. The store formally apologized and acknowledged the hurt the incident caused Capo. The mediated settlement agreement ensures the store will train its staff to properly serve customers of all backgrounds, with a specific focus on cultural competency training to strengthen relationships with Indigenous customers. Store manager was also fired.
The main thing is that the racism is highlighted and identified, and as the Commissioner Arnott said, the mistakes are identified and people learn from the mistakes, and we go on from there.
The chief of Attawapiskat is not holding out much hope for a pledge made in his community by the Minister of Indigenous Services. That story's coming up after the break. Here's a look at Thursday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. 23 under the sun for Charlottetown, sunny and 26 in Fredericton. Rain in Nain with a high of 10, 16 for Le Grand River. Sunny skies across much of Quebec, 28 in Montreal, 22 for Saguenay. 29 with showers in Toronto and Ottawa, 30 for Windsor. Showers and 29 for Thunder Bay, rain and 26 in Sioux Lookout. 14 with rain for Churchill, 27 and showers for Norway House and God's Lake. Rain for Winnipeg, Gimli and Brandon with a high of 29. Sunny in Regina with a high of 25, 27 in Estevan, 26 in Swift Current. Rain and 27 in Uranium City, 19 in Meadow Lake. Welcome back. The chief of Attawapiskat First Nation says he does not believe the federal government will fix his community's water contamination problem following a visit from the Minister of Indigenous Services over the weekend. Willow Fiddler has more.
After his visit to Attawapiskat on Sunday, the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada tweeted out his plans to fix their water crisis. In the short term, this week, we will bring in extra medical teams to evaluate any children or adults with health concerns. This week, we will bring in water technicians to work on the plant and fix the reverse osmosis units to make sure they are running well. We will flush out the water system completely to get those THM levels under control. That will happen now. The minister's long-term solution is a new water treatment center, but Chief Ignace Gall isn't so sure that the minister can deliver.
The big issue right now is that we haven't seen any commitment in terms of funding-wise. You know, we did receive $1.5 million way back, I would say, just to fix Band-Aid, fix one thing. But you know, living up here is that, you know, something broke again tomorrow. The First Nation needs another $10 million to fix everything, to bring the water level to a safety, so people don't have to be afraid using it for washing, taking showers, or cleaning their food and vegetables, and for other many daily uses.
Attawapiskat declared a state of emergency earlier this month after levels of trihalomethanes, also known as THMs, and haloacidic acids, or HAAs, were found in the community's tap water. High THM levels is what caused Idmatung First Nation to also declare a state of emergency this month. Gall said the federal government is failing them.
You know, you remember when the Prime Minister announced when he was elected back in 2015 of October, he said at that time that he would end all boil water advisories in the First Nation communities. And I mean, that's 4 years ago. And First Nations are still screaming for clean water.
In an email to APTN News, the minister's office repeated the same promises the minister tweeted out Sunday. Gall said his community is frustrated with a problem that should have been fixed long ago.
The studies have been done. We've been studied to death ever since this whole thing began in 1976 when they put in the water intake and the distribution system in 1994. You know, studies are collecting dust on shelves at Indigenous Services Canada. You know, we have everything identified, costed out, what needs to be done. So, you know, why reinvent the wheel, right? If you could just do the things that needs to be done because they're already identified.
Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Thunder Bay.
The 5th anniversary of the Mount Polley mine disaster is just over a week away. The mining company has never been charged, although found at fault. APTN's Lori Hamlin takes a look back.
Tina Ogden-Sellers was shocked when she first got the call.
Mount Polley breached. I'm like, you got to be kidding. I worked there. I know how huge that thing is.
This valley was once only 4 feet wide and full of life. But the massive breach in Mount Polley's tailings pond on August 4th, 2014 changed all that. Millions of cubic meters of contaminated mining waste spewed throughout the area, taking down everything in its path.
Just where the skeleton of a tree looks, straight up against that far wall of trees here, it come out there and it blew the heck right out of it. It was sad to think of all, what got taken away. This being so lush and green and moose favoring it, prime habitat for moose, and I haven't seen any tracks. I've been watching, and even if they were, I don't know if I would want to eat them.
The waste spilled into Polley Lake, Hazelton Creek, and Quesnel Lake, which is connected to the Fraser River watershed, the largest salmon-producing river in the world. The mine is located within the Soda Creek and Williams Lake bands in Shuswap Nation. They have participation agreements with the mining company. Although a panel of experts found that the dam failed because of an unstable foundation, Imperial Metals, who owns the copper and gold mine, has never been charged.
I get very angry with having to live on federal land and watch the economy and the government do as it pleases out here, and then stuff like this ends up.
A joint government investigation into the disaster was incomplete 3 years after the breach, which was the cutoff for the province to lay charges. In April 2019, the investigation was finally finished, and charges under the Federal Fisheries Act were recommended. That window to lay charges closes on August 4th.
You ask me if it frustrates me, you damn straight it does.
But there is no time limit to lay criminal charges, and it's all up to the Crown to decide on what charges, or if any at all. Robert Phillips from the First Nations Political Summit and First Nations Leadership Council says Canada's mining practices are archaic and need immediate changes.
It happened. It was one of the worst environmental disasters in Canada, and now we can learn from this and we have to do something about it. And as you know, government doesn't necessarily act unless there's litigation, unless it's put in laws. So that's what we're pushing for. That's what we're advocating for. That's what we're lobbying for.
Phillips believes a very large security deposit in the millions, even billions, is needed in order for mining companies to operate, to guarantee they can't just walk away.
The money would be secured, it would be there, and then we can access the funding, the money, then to clean up the sites. It just makes so much sense.
Mount Polley reopened 2 years after the breach, using an effluent pipe to pump the mine's surface water off-site, instead of collecting in the tailings pond. The mine water is first treated in a filtering plant, then piped almost 50 meters below the surface of Quesnel Lake. The effluent pipe was required by the Ministry of Environment as part of a long-term water management plan. Ogden Sellers is worried that the province is taking too many chances with her nation's salmon-bearing waterways, but she says she's not surprised by their decision.
I really am at a loss with that. It's typical. Sounds like government to me.
Imperial Metals recently shut its doors temporarily due to low copper prices, and that worries Phillips. He's concerned the company is going to walk away without consequences.
Someone has to pay the cost. You know, this can't just happen and the company just gets off scot-free.
APTN requested an interview with Imperial Metals and the Northern Shuswap Tribal Council, but they did not respond. Lori Hamlin, APTN National News, Secwepemc Territory.
For several years, the Wolastoqey Nation has opposed the Sisson mine in central New Brunswick. Vancouver-based Northcliffe Resources is behind the proposed $570 million open-pit tungsten mine. The company says it would create hundreds of jobs and operate for 27 years. But recent federal approvals for a tailings pond have found many in the territory worried as the project inches toward final approval. Justin Brake has more.
Every year we have a feast for the ancestors, and just to kind of honor them and let them know, we're here to protect and to preserve the area.
Here in the woods in Wolastoqey territory, Ron Tremblay and Ramona Nicholas offer tobacco and talk about the ceremonies that have been held here. For a few years now, Wolastoqey have visited these lands and waters in central New Brunswick, which could soon be forever lost to make way for a proposed open-pit tungsten mine.
I thought it was important for us to reconnect back doing ceremony. And that's, for me, why establishing this area to have a sweat lodge, to have a longhouse, to have that area so that we can, have the ceremonies out here so that we can connect not only to the land but the ancestors that are here as well.
Last month, the Trudeau government quietly approved the destruction of 2 brooks to make way for a tailings pond. But Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett, who was in Fredericton Tuesday for the Assembly of First Nations Annual Assembly, says there are many conditions that must be met before the mine can become a reality.
This is something that again has many, many more steps ahead of it. I think 20 more steps that need to be reconciled if it is to move forward.
But the federal cabinet decision upset Tremblay, who is a Grand Chief of the traditional Wolastoqey Grand Council. He fears an outcome like the 2014 Mount Polley mining disaster in BC.
One of those 2 brooks is the last spawning spot for salmon, which was once our main source for food.
Tricia Bernard, Chief of Madawaska First Nation, says 5 of the 6 Wolastoqey First Nation chiefs remain opposed to the mine. In 2017, they signed an accommodation agreement with the province, but said they were pressured by the Liberals, who threatened to withhold other sources of revenue. Still, they say despite signing those agreements, which came with $3 million signing bonuses, they haven't consented to the mine.
Signing a consultation agreement is not consent. It just means that we went through the consultation and accommodation process. So by going through that process, we signed the agreement saying that we did. But at no point in the agreement does it say we consent.
New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs, whose Conservative government has inherited the project, says clarity is needed around duty to consult, or investors could be scared off from doing business in the province.
Because at the end of the day, if we want investment in our province, and if we're all saying that we want our economy to grow, and we all want to have the funds generated in order to look after the education and the systems that need to be upgraded, the water supply, all of these issues that are real, we have to know what the process is so we know when we're finished.
AFN National Chief Perry Bellegarde says the path to certainty is clear.
I always say it's you need to move beyond duty, consult, and accommodate, and use free, prior, informed consent. And if you want a real stable economy, you want an economy that's ripe for investment. Everybody's got to know what the rules are.
Though the Wolastoqey Grand Council and First Nation leadership in the province work independently of one another, they seem to agree on one thing.
This is unceded territory, and it belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the leaders. It belongs to the people, the Wolastoqey people.
Bernard told APTN that Wolastoqey chiefs are in the process of talking about putting forward a land claim to their territory, but it's a process that could take decades and likely would not stop the Sisson mine. Justin Brake, APTN National News, Fredericton on unceded Wolastoqey territory.
Jody Wilson-Raybould is about to drop a book, and it's time for release just ahead of the federal election. More on that coming up. Here's the rest of Thursday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. 16 with rain for Peace River, 20 in rain in Fort McMurray. Sunny skies and 29 for Medicine Hat, 25 under the sun for Calgary. Sunny and 24 in Vancouver, rain and 24 for Campbell River. 18 with showers for Dease Lake. Sun's out in Smithers with a high of 18. 24 in rain for Old Crow, 20 under the sun for Whitehorse. Rain and 20 for Fort Liard and Trout Lake. Sunny skies and 24 in Yellowknife. 5 for Sax Harbor, 9 in Pawlatuck, sunny and 24 for Fort McPherson. 12 with showers in Whale Cove, 9 for Baker Lake, 11 in Arviette. 9 with showers for Resolute, Arctic Bay, and Igloolik. Welcome back. A grassroots movement to develop a Green New Deal for Canada to address the climate crisis is in its early stages. But Ariel Deranger of Indigenous Climate Action is calling out those behind the movement for not including and respecting Indigenous perspectives and rights. She joins us now from Edmonton. Ariel, thanks for being with us. For those who don't know, what is the Green New Deal and who's trying to bring it to Canada?
Well, the Green New Deal is a brand new initiative in Canada that is being spearheaded by environmental groups, social justice groups, and some right or left-leaning politicians. And it's a deal to address the climate crisis and the economic crisis together, while simultaneously addressing a long-standing history of human and environmental rights abuses in the country.
And so I understand you were invited to help develop the Canadian Green New Deal. What did you learn in that process?
Well, you know, this is a deal where they're trying to address all the things, from the climate crisis to the social justice issues. And the reality is they're not actually meeting the mark, because what is happening is those that are holding seats of power tend to continue to be those big greens like the environmental organizations like Greenpeace, NRDC, Sierra Club, so on and so forth. And while they want to invite more people to the table, like Indigenous groups and communities and organizations, we don't have those resources, both manpower or financial resources. And what we've seen, instead of being actively involved, is that we're scrambling to be there, and when we raise concerns, they don't know how to address our concerns. It's just a document and a position that's being still driven by those with positions of power, largely white folks.
Earl, what role should Indigenous peoples play in developing a Green New Deal, and how can those in the movement ensure Indigenous voices have a say?
Well, just yesterday, the AFN just passed a resolution declaring a climate emergency. And I think the reality is a lot of our communities don't even know what the Green New Deal is, because it's, again, being driven by these large groups. At the grassroots, we still don't know what that is, but we know what the climate emergency is. We know what we need to do to address it locally. We know that it's not just about the environment, it's about our fundamental Indigenous rights. And it's also about how we can find equality and equity in how we're paving the way future to address all of these things. For communities, that means that we have a seat at the table, not just as tokens and stakeholders, but as leaders in the movement.
Earl, I guess for yourself and like-minded people, how are you going to keep the climate on the radar as we head into a federal election here?
I think if the climate isn't on the radar, then we're all failing. The reality is we can't escape the fact that climate change has huge implications on our economies, huge implications on human health, and huge implications on our abilities as Indigenous people to continue practicing our fundamental treaty and inherent rights. So I think that if we're serious about protecting our communities, our lands and territories, we need to be talking about climate change, and it should be an issue we're all getting involved in.
Earl, we'll have to leave it there. Appreciate you taking some time for us.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, just in time for the upcoming election, a book by former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould. The former high-profile cabinet minister has penned a book titled From Where I Stand, Rebuilding Indigenous Nations for a Stronger Canada. It's set for release on September 20th. Wilson-Raybould quit the cabinet over the SNC-Lavalin scandal. In a news release, there's no mention of whether the scandal will be discussed in the book. Wilson-Raybould plans to run as an independent in the October election. Well, that is your APTN National News for this Wednesday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca, and stay up to date with the latest by downloading the APTN News app. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. See you back here tomorrow.